I'm talking about. Yeah, you ain't my real daddy, you ain't my real daddy. Well, look here, I'm fucking your mama for real. Now that's real. Bitches.
Intro. So we're gonna get into something real quick. So Professor Black Truth, an anonymous person on the internet who needs to still be vetted, along with his friend Jason Black. They need to be identified and vetted. Came out with a video yesterday regarding the Texas freeze, and like most people without a real agenda. He missed a large point. He was trying to make some point about white supremacy and how it's abandoning people and all this other craziness. And it wasn't really effective. So let me play a piece of this, because I will give attribution, because this is the source of where I initially found this information. And then we'll talk about what I think is the significant portion of this conversation.
Cortez, of all people, not that I'm sticking up for her, but just goes to show they're trying to point the finger in all directions except at themselves. In fact, they're even pointing the dirty end of the stick at their own citizens. I posted for you on my Twitter page how Tim Boyd, the now former mayor of Colorado, Texas, deliberately went online and posted an inflammatory tongue lashing of his own citizens, the people who voted for him, the people who he took an oath to serve, excoriating them, telling them that no one owes them or their families anything. Well, I guess that includes leadership too, as he sees it. He just went on and on and on. He said the city and county, along with the power providers or any other service, owes you nothing. Now look at that. He said the city owes you nothing.
It's kind of frustrating that he didn't actually read it, so I'm going to pause and read it, because it needs to be read. A large amount of times we look at these things and we just go off of, again, what somebody else has said about it, as opposed to actually reading it for ourselves. So it's reading time with hopefully no Yvette Carnell-esque errors. Let me hurt some feelings while I have a minute. No one owes you or your family anything, nor is it the local government's responsibility to support you during trying times like this. Sink or swim, it's your choice. The city and county, along with power providers, or any other service owes you nothing. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout. If you don't have electricity, you step up and come up with a game plan to keep your family warm and safe. Pause, Tim Boyd. But if you're under a system of institutional racism that's propping up a system of white supremacy, and you are a descendant of American slaves who has a generational lineage of having systematic deprivation from being able to access and hold on to wealth, you won't be able to buy that generator at Walmart. You won't be able to buy that, during good times and be able to have it there for trying times. You don't have an opportunity to be a prepper because you're more focused on the hamster wheel of employment and unemployment, or the hamster wheel of trying to constantly catch up on bills, to try to get ahead with education that's lacking based off of known systematic problems with your community. Okay. So you won't just be able to go out and step up and buy a generator at Walmart with money you don't have. So that's ignorant, but let's continue. I'm sick and tired of people looking for a damn handout. A government assistance is not a handout. If you don't have electricity, you step up and come up with a game plan to keep your family warm and safe. If you have no water, you deal without. The human body puts a time limit on dealing without water. It's not a mental issue. It's not a choice. It's not a decision. And think outside of the box to survive and supply water to your family. If you are sitting at home in the cold because you have no power and are sitting there waiting for someone to come rescue you because you're lazy, is direct result of your raising. See, that it's almost too good to be true that he's saying this, right? Because these are lines that are used against black people and descendants of American slaves in order to demean them when they seek government assistance to handle their systematic poverty situation. So the lines of being lazy, of lacking willpower, some sort of deficiency of will is actually a problem, because really the opposite is true. Suicide rates among black people and white people are very different. And if you were to put white people in the same socioeconomic conditions and raise them in the same conditions, or rapidly shift them to the same socioeconomic conditions as black people, or specifically descendants of American slaves, you would have a problem with those people, with their ability to cope with that situation. They would have a huge problem with their ability to cope with the psychological changes that they are going to go through, so far as stress levels that they're going to go through, having to deal with that on a daily basis, right? As descendants of American slaves, we know the whole notion of, if I were to go down this road, every descendant of American slave, especially male, but some females try to, some females and LGBTQ members try to escape this thought through their self-identity of another minority class. But most descendants of American slaves, definitely every male descendant of American slaves, can't understand this, of sitting in the bed and thinking to yourself, damn, it really doesn't matter how hard I work. These racist bastards are still gonna do this shit to me. Whatever this shit is, every descendant of American slaves has had that moment multiple times in their life, right? And dealing with that. Everything could be good. You could have the job, you could have money in the bank, you could have, the material trappings of what American society says should make you happy. And independent of all of that, every single descendant of American slaves, specifically every male descendant of American slaves, has gone through that thought process of laying in bed thinking to themselves, these racist bastards are going to keep on doing it, right? And I wonder what the psyche of a white person would have to go through if they had to deal with that constant pressure and constant situation and survive, literally survive in that scenario, right? If one thing you can say about descendants of American slaves, considering their socioeconomic background and the history of racial discrimination with violence in this country, and how it has affected us on a direct psychological level, there is nothing mentally feeble or lazy about my people. There's nothing lazy about us. But it's funny how this, I suspect, white supremacist Tim Boyd is using that same language against primarily other white people. One of the things that he did point out in this show is that Colorado City, Texas is 70% white. It's only 5% black. But it exposes something else that I'll get into with my comments below, right? But you could see sort of the framing being used predominantly against other white people, right? It says, if you are sitting at home in the cold because you have no power and are sitting there waiting for someone to come rescue you, which is the whole purpose of civilized society and a federal and state and local government, you're investing your money and you're handing over your consent to be governed to other people, such that the society as a whole is benefited by that transfer of power. And in exchange, the social contract is that you're supposed to get something for that relinquishment of your otherwise God-given rights. But he says, don't wait for someone to come rescue you because you're lazy is a direct result of your raising. Only the strong will survive and the weak will perish. Folks, God has given us the tools to support ourselves in times like this. Here's the invocation of Christianity that is a common staple of all white supremacy. This is sadly a product of a socialist government where they feed people to believe that the few will work and others will become dependent for handouts. Okay, I have no idea what the hell this guy is talking about. Every single system of government, no matter if it's socialist, authoritarian, there is a social contract. There is something the government, the few, is promising to the many, right? It's just the means of how that's actually being provided to the many through the actions of the few, right? That social contract of expecting something from your government is there in any system of government. It doesn't matter the form or type. But anyways, and it's not called handouts. But he keeps on saying that because the welfare queen logic is the only one he can actually apply here. Because, and I'll get into why, because I think he's very fearful of what the long-term implications of this storm is going to be. I am sorry that you have been dealing without electricity and water, yes, but I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anyone that is capable. He's the mayor of a city saying this. But I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anyone that is capable of doing it for themselves. So again, we're going back to the whole notion of systematic white supremacy, like systemic racism, which these terms need to be defined, right? I brought this up on Iremy's video. These terms need to be defined. I have definitions for these terms: institutional racism, systemic racism. I have definitions for white supremacy. I have a root definition for racism for myself that helps me frame my conversations about this. But these are not necessarily universal, right? But again, you could sort of see the problems here with what he's talking about. But I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anyone that is capable of doing it for themselves. We have lost sight of those in need and those that take advantage of the system and mesh them together into one group. It doesn't matter. So what he's saying is we've meshed together white people with descendants of American slaves. Notice how I'm not carving out white Latinos in this statement because they are white people as well. But basically, we're having to combine white people, good hardworking white people, with those black people who are systemically disadvantaged, and we're trying to provide government assistance to them both groups, right? This is sort of like a weather balloon or test balloon for whether or not this type of rhetoric, typically a general rhetoric justifying continued systemic oppression of descendants of American slaves through the lack of adequate of an adequate addressment of the true core effect of white supremacy, which is wealth deprivation and disparity between white people and descendants of American slaves. What he's trying to do is apply that locally, and in an active crisis, he's trying to apply that in a targeted way. And it didn't work because he had to resign. He did a trial balloon and it didn't work, and he had to resign eventually. But you can sort of see what he's trying to do here. He's trying to see whether or not he could try to figure out a framework to direct all of the known government resources and the soon-to-be directed FEMA resources and try to direct that in a discriminatory way, right? And it didn't work. But he's trying to do the rhetoric in order to see whether or not he would get any sort of reprimand for it in the state of Texas. And he did because it was so blatant. But I'm glad he did because it showed something else. But I'll be damned if I'm going to provide for anyone that is capable of doing it themselves. We have lost sight of those, nobody can actually make water come to their house if the pipe is broken. But whatever. We have lost sight of those in need and those that take advantage of the system and mesh them together into one, like a citizenry of a country. Bottom line, quit crying and looking for a handout. Get off your ass and take care of your own family. So that's his statement, right? And to me, it showed something else, right? But let's get into my reply to this. HARP, Trump access denied, Biden access granted. If you know about HARP, know that it's not misspelled. You already know where I'm going with this, but I'm not losing sight of white supremacy in this. Convenient how long-term this random act of God, quotes, will throw cold water on any talks of Texas secession, as Texans are now for a generation or two no longer confident in their state's ability to independently provide basic services. And in order to restore this confidence, problem, action, solution in the future, Texas will have to embrace ideals previously labeled socialist, which he did so in his comments up there, by conservatism. Ideals that frown on separatism, right? Because at the core of the opposite side of conservatism is collectivism, right? Communism is sort of a perversion of communalism, right? But the whole idea is that you're stronger together. So bringing in those ideals that say, hey, we need to more adequately regulate this energy company that we have in our state. And maybe we need to more adequately regulate companies in general that we have in our state, and including the new ones that are moving to our state, such that they are not potentially in the future systemically harmful to the citizens of the state, right? Because here's the deal. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? Or everybody talks shit until it's time to actually do shit, right? So everybody in Texas can talk all this independence and bullshit and this, that, and the third, but when they're freezing in their home with no lights, it's kind of hard to say that I'm for states' rights or I'm for limited government when the only government body that's willing to help you is the federal government, and the only government body with the framework to actually help you is the federal government, because apparently public officials in Texas assume that you're supposed to handle your own problems, right? So any idea of secession, which I actually thought was justified, in my opinion. The Texas ruling should have been heard by the Texas Supreme Court challenge should have been heard by the Supreme Court. Texas does have standing in that regard. All they have to do is, in my opinion, is wait for an executive order. That's all they really had to do, is wait for an executive order or any sort of action by Joe Biden in order to make that claim that they were affected. Maybe they filed it slightly early, but it should have been heard regardless by the Supreme Court. The fact that it wasn't was a big wind in the sails of a secessionist movement in Texas, and therefore an upcoming purity test for politicians in Texas as to whether or not they were for or against. This event in Texas actually throws full cold water on all of that, right? So Texas will have to embrace ideals previously labeled socialist by conservatism, ideals that frown on separatism. Also, if this goes on longer, it may reverse the CalExit trend for businesses flocking to Texas as their employees begin to dislike the notion of Texas governance, and businesses feel the chilly breeze of the specter of new regulation to restore constituent confidence. Right? So you have all these companies going down to Austin because they love the weather and they love the low taxes and they love this and they love that and they love the third, right? But now they're realizing, wait a minute, we're in a fucking hellhole. These little bastards don't know how to run shit, and when shit hits the fan, they're gonna tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Now we know that doesn't work for the niggers, so why the hell would it work for us? All right? We definitely can't work like that. We're white people. We depend on the government. We from birth till death, suck on the teat of American governance. It's just that some of us go a little bit harder in the paint trying to say that we don't. So I think that some of the employees are going to basically not want to go down to Austin. I think some of the businesses are going to think to themselves, Texas is going to have to change. I wonder if that change is going to be increased regulation. I don't know if I really want to go to Texas. Maybe I should go somewhere else, right? I don't want to pay taxes, but I want a healthy set of regulations that basically ensures that my business isn't an icicle with no power for several days, if not weeks, right? So I wonder if that's going to change the trend, but we'll see. Anyways, my guess, God's hand, quotes included, remains on the harp, not misspelled, for 3 or more weeks, if not longer. It seems as though the power structure is attacking the core symbol and ideological cultural wellspring of American white supremacist power, Texas. And I've put this in another right? That I thought that I haven't posted that, but I haven't posted like 3 or 4 videos really, because I wanted to see what was going on. And it's funny how certain people are chiming in on certain things. But anyways, but I thought that after the insurrection, you had the power structure has to attack white supremacy, right? It's sort of like a dog that bit the owner's hand. And I think that white people, and I'll get into that, but white people have started, especially in America, have forgotten the older version of supremacy. Supremacy wasn't based on whiteness, it was based on wealth. And birthright, divine rule is where it really comes from, right? Serfdom is in the multi-millennia idea of kingship, of kingdom rule over others, has sort of been forgotten in this country as everybody embraced white supremacy as the core binding glue of white people. But really, the binding glue is class to a certain degree. White supremacy is just, in America, the experimental and successfully experimental diversion of that otherwise expression of control over a populace, right? And it seems as though what's going on is that they are attacking, right? It seems as though they are trying to openly create an oligarchy as opposed to depending on social white supremacy as the binding glue for lower classes of white people. And so what they're doing is they're attacking the power center of that, which is Texas. And when I gotta add this in here, hold on. That's not right. Gotta add this in here. What you're seeing here is what's called the apotheosis, I think, right? Apotheosis of George Washington, right? This is in the Capitol building. So when all those white supremacists were in the Capitol building, walking in the rotunda and looking straight forward, they sort of ignored this part that was above their heads. And let me zoom in here so you can sort of see what's going on here. So while we have a narrative in this country of white supremacy fighting kingships, right, and fighting divine rule, right, and the American Revolution was about setting up a constitutional, a democracy, a republic, and this, that, and the third, and it was to abolish kingship. I think what we need to do is we need to realize the birth of our nation in and of itself. When we say that the United States is founded on white supremacy, right? I think what we need to realize is what that truly means, right? When you have this person here, first of all, this little symbol with one hand up and one hand down, I'm not going to go there. That's a more metaphysical thing. But anyways, what you're seeing here is this. But let's define apotheosis, right? For those who think I'm not pronouncing it correctly, there you go. This is the second definition of apotheosis. Elevation to divine status, deification, right? Applied to Roman emperors, right? And if you notice all the Roman imagery surrounding him, right, even though this is not a Roman nation, you see all the Roman imagery surrounding him in this apotheosis of George Washington. So let me back up. So what actually happened is you went from serfdom, right? You went from the divine right of kings, and therefore the divine authority of their minions, right? The dukes and earls, the people within their court, right? Having some sort of perverted hermetic symbolism or analogy of as above, so below, right? So as they see God in heaven, they tried to set up a system on earth mirroring that. But kingship in general outdates Christianity. So you can't really say that Christianity is setting up kingship, but what you can see what they did was, first of all, this is why white Jesus is important, right? The very first thing, or one of the first things that they did, was try to change the symbology of Jesus to being a white person. And in so doing, in changing that symbology to it being from a black person or a person with brown skin, which we're not going to go into the colorism of that because I don't know if that bastard actually exists at all. But changing him from a person with brown skin or black skin or whatever in the art of the time, because most of that art was trying to mimic Egyptian art, which Egyptian people, or excuse me, Kemetic people, not the Egyptians, not the mixture of Greek people after the conquer of Egypt by Greece, not the Arabic people after the conquer of Egypt in 641. I'm talking about the actual builders of the pyramids, the Kemetic people. Hint, hint, if you hear anybody saying ancient Egypt or Egyptologist, then you know damn well they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Because you would never say an Iraqitologist when you're talking about a person who studies Babylon. You would never conflate Iraq with Babylon or Samaria. You would never do that. You would never conflate an actual ancient location with the modern day nation state that controls the territory. But we do that all the time when it comes down to Egypt. But the imagery of those individuals was black. Right? The imagery of those individuals were black. Of Christ and baby, they were black or heavily brown skinned at the very least. Then that changed to white people. It changed to a white Jesus, right? And then they set up a divine right of kings associated with that. You could argue that that really goes back to Constantinople when Constantine sort of used the cross as a military conquering tool, right? As a means of bringing both legitimacy to his conquering as well as a cohesiveness to his civilization by bringing in Christianity, saying, hey, even though we're extremely violent, hey, we're not violent, we're Christians. We love that we turn the other cheek. Of course, we have an army and we killed a shit ton of people, but hey, it's all good. We're Christians because they're relying on the older conquering edicts within the Bible and contained in the Old Testament that morally justified Judaism to sort of conquer territories, including killing women, children, all the animals in the city. That Old Testament type of eye for an eye, they have that in there too. The two are combined, so you can technically use both and still say that you're still a Christian, right? And so they went from the divine right of kings and then sort of diluted that over to an individual version of the divine right or divine rule. So instead of having kingship, the real transformation of America was transforming the divine right of kings and distributing it to the home, distributing it to the personal castle within, which is your home, and saying that if you are a part of this white class of people, you are closer to Jesus Christ than these black people that we are conquering, right? It's still divine rule, but that's the reason why rule of law has to be a part of it, right? That's the reason why white supremacy has to be the law of the land, right? I'm going to do a separate video for this, but technically racism in America has already been solved with the Capitol insurrection. You know how? Because Nancy Pelosi and all those people on Capitol Hill decided to vet the National Guardsmen for background and association with white supremacy. Why can't they use those same background checks for every single federal employee? Why can't Joe Biden, just like he did with the 1994 crime bill, make every single state use that exact same criteria for all for all state employees, saying that, hey, if you don't use this background check mechanism to root out people with associations to white supremacy, specifically in your police department, specifically in your educational institutions, specifically during a pandemic, which I believe a large amount of black people are dying not because of the pandemic, they're dying because they got a racist nurse and a racist doctor that don't give a shit about them, allowing them to die in the fucking hospital. That's what I really think is going on. Right? But yeah, let's use this same system to vet, the same system we use to vet those National Guardsmen protecting the Capitol. Let's use that exact same methodology to vet all state employees. And then let's go over to the EEOC and say that we're going to vet every single person that we have a complaint against. If we have a specific complaint against an employee at a private company, we're going to use that exact same background check methodology to see whether or not that person has affiliation and association with white supremacy in their past, right? Then all of a sudden the mechanisms of control, like for instance holding a large amount of personal data for private citizens, gets turned on its head, right, and used for something that's good. If the NSA has a record of all of your internet history going back to 2002, or they have a copy of all your phone records going back to 2003, or if they have had in the past access to your, directly to your laptop, because you were adjacent to a criminal investigation, now they can use all of that information like they most probably did when vetting those National Guardsmen. Now they can use all that same information to root out white supremacy and have white supremacy finally in this country have a cost associated with it. Because as of right now, it doesn't. But I want to make sure that we understand that when we're talking about white supremacy, right? When we're talking about white supremacy, we're talking about sort of a devolution, and I'll get into that and the other parts of that. But we started with the divine right of kings. Then we went over to American white supremacy, which allowed for using Christianity to distribute that divine right of kings locally, such that every white person was a king within his own domain. And therefore, what does a king need in order for him to truly be a king? A true king needs subjects, right? And we were the permanent subject class. We weren't members of the court like white Latinos are, or sellout Caribbean people are, or sellout African people are, or sellout Asian people are, or sellout Indian people are. We're not members of the court. No, we are subjects. We're the persons outside tilling the field, right? Because having that historical, genetic, archetypical memory for thousands of years in white society of feudalism, they wanted to have their ego stroked by finally having access to a kingship of their own. And that's what Christianity combined with white supremacy has sort of provided them in this American society, right? Because we have to remember the 1400s is around about Dark Ages time as well, right? Black Plague times and everything else. White society was getting ready to eat itself, you know what I'm saying, with all the shit that was going on at the time. All right? It was getting ready to eat itself alive with all the shit that was going on. All right? So at the end of the day, well, the Renaissance was running by that time period too, so technically they had gotten out of it, but still, if it weren't for, I believe, the Americas, I believe that European society would have definitely been dwarfed, right, by African society at some point, right? I think that they would have ignored Africa long enough for them to be able to resurge, and I think it would have been problematic. But having a new land and having a new industrial, sort of like a colonialist industrial revolution during that time period saved them a large amount, right? And allowed them more specifically to expand their culture to a new territory to sort of save it. At this point, they don't have another territory to expand their culture to, and so therefore they are basically about to be devoured by non-white, non-Anglo, I should say, people within the society. But I want the point to be made that there is a progression from divine right of kings to American white supremacy using Christianity. That is the reason why, again, white supremacy has to be a system enshrined in law, because when you're talking about that, you're sort of grabbing, it does go back, that's the reason why they're using Roman imagery as well. It does go back to a model citizen. A Roman citizen can't be held accountable for treating a slave as a slave, right? It has to be enshrined in law, the privileges of Roman citizens, right? And just the same, it has to be enshrined in law, the privileges of white supremacy. It cannot be a situation where it's not enshrined in law. It has to be not only enshrined in law, but it also has to be morally justified theologically, because violence is a component, right? And the best religion to use that has a schism within itself, a schizophrenia within its own logic, is Christianity. On one page you talk about, for instance, Sodom and Gomorrah. People don't talk about the fact that the daughters of the guy who fled Sodom and Gomorrah went to a cave and they tried to have sex with their father, right? We talk about, oh, Sodom and Gomorrah is an example of God's wrath on homosexuals, but then they forget about the fact that the father, after the mother was turned to salt, the father went into a cave and was trying to have sex, or there was a situation where the daughters was trying to have sex with the father to have a baby, right? The schism is within the same story in certain cases, right? So this is the one guy that's morally okay to be saved from this city, hand chosen by angels of God, and yet when they get into a cave, he's trying to have incest with his daughters, right? Right? You can have on one part of the book where God himself, the vengeful God of Abraham, that doesn't exist, all right, is talking about killing everybody in the city, man, woman, child, dog, pig, cat, every living thing must be slaughtered. And if you don't listen to me, not only am I going to punish you, but I'm going to make sure that somebody conquers you because you didn't listen to what the hell I said. And then on the other page, you have a situation where somebody's ear gets cut off and it gets reattached. Or somebody basically is being told that even if you get struck down, you should pray for your enemy, right? It's the greatest schizophrenic theology in the history of the fucking world. And I've already went into the reasons why. Is because it's actually a synthesis of two different moral theological frameworks, a slave morality and a master morality. It's combined into one, right? It's combined into one. The slave morality is mostly the New Testament shit, and the master morality, which is not necessarily better, which is not necessarily right, is coming from the Older Testament type of theology, right? And it's a synthesis of those two theologies
a religion for the slave and a religion for the slave master that you're seeing with Christianity. So that's the reason why they chose Christianity as their moral compass, as their theological justification for white supremacy, right? So I just wanted to pause and add this part because it gets deeper than just, oh, they're white supremacists. Oh, it just so happens that all white supremacists are Christians. Oh, it just so happens that Christians can be morally oxymoronic in their actions, that they can, have one sort of moral set of codes and then act in a way that seemingly counters it, right? It's more than that. In the distribution, right, which also is aided by, you could also think of the Protestant Reformation from a standpoint of white supremacists. Or you can look at it from a white supremacist framework, right, of distributing that doctrine, that document to the masses, aided in this distribution of divine right of kings to people, and sort of set up a framework where it mandated that those individuals had, therefore, a kingship below them. It mandated that they had people beneath them and below them within that system, right? Once they started to understand the Bible itself, right? And so, without having to go to church or go through a priest in order to find that those answers, right? And so, I just wanted to add that as a part of this discussion, right? That this is a part of what you're dealing with when you're talking about a system of white supremacy. Let me reduce this just a little bit so you can get the full framework of what's going on here with the rainbow and all. But you can see more so the Roman influences behind the photo. So if you think that they're not using that second definition of apotheosis when they're talking about the apotheosis of George Washington, don't kid yourself. So anyways, back to the regularly scheduled program.
It was antebellum slavery times. It was Virginia. Post-Civil War, it was Georgia, technically Georgia, Mississippi, but really Georgia. Post-Civil Rights Act of 1965, Dixiecrat Revolt or Rebellion, it sort of shifted to Texas. And then my belief is that the next stop for white supremacy as a sort of wellspring, a cultural wellspring, is going to be Oregon or Utah, right, in the next 5 to 10 years. Because it can't stay Texas, because Texas is going to have to embrace legislation that is completely counter to the conservatism rhetoric in their state. They're going to have to create a massive wall of regulation to ensure confidence in their constituents that such an ice storm or such an event won't happen in the future, as well as other safeguards as well to sort of protect themselves from other natural disasters. As they go down that road, it's going to be harder for them to have or maintain that conservative ideology, because while they're talking about conservatism, they're also advocating regulation and potentially breaking up of monopolies, which should have always been a part of their platform, but they're going to have to go down that road because of the social media aspects of it. It seems as though white supremacy has decided to say, we can do without conservatism altogether. We can do without white supremacy altogether. We can break up Democrats into conservative Democrats and traditional conservative Democrats and progressives, and that could be the new duopoly, the new dynamic. And we don't need white supremacy or traditional conservatism anymore. We can label that whole thing wholesale as racist and white supremacist, and then we could also criticize it because it actually uses a large amount of our governance framework that they used to previously denounce in running a state like Texas, right? A conservative, gun-holding state like Texas, all right? So that's why I believe that it's going to have to move, and the trend has been moving westernly as well as southernly. But I think there's probably either going to be Utah, which Utah is problematic because Utah has had to sort of come off of, it no longer has, well, it has a base of operation, but that base of operation, that theological base for white supremacy in Utah is Mormonism. And Mormonism has had to sort of come off of some of its previous tenets that made it a purity test passer, so far as its inclusion of black pastors into its priesthood class and stuff like that. It's had to change some of those things. So, the whole idea of a grand movement to Mormonism, and then using Utah as the base of white supremacy is just not really going to be there, even though I do believe a large amount of those bastards are racist as fuck in Utah. So I think it's going to be Oregon. I think it's going to be Oregon, is my thought on that matter. But we'll see. Or it could be Florida. So I was like, if they are lazy and willing to pass the torch of white supremacy to white Latinos, early, then they choose Florida and DeSantis' red meat toss bonanza, in which case I fear the next hurricane season. Read that how you want to. White supremacy minus descendants of American slaves equals feral Darwinism. Good to know. And that's basically what it is, right? It's feral Darwinism, right? If you die, you're meant to die. Oh, we have this framework over here called the government that's supposed to help you not die. Fuck you, die, right? That's sort of the mantra behind the veil, behind the white robes of white supremacy, is a feral Darwinism, right? That they sort of apply to us, but at the end of the day, they're able to apply even on their own people if necessary, right? So remember, they practice on us, Flint, but they play the game with white people. They have a full playbook of how this will go, up to including who will be arrested for this crisis and when, how to manage the optics to both highlight and ignore as needed, how the local and state population will respond to the crisis and potential changes to voting habits and voting priorities, long term and short. Flint is a perfect case study on where the pressure points lay from a crisis stemming from a catastrophic failure of infrastructure and how long a populace can endure it. That data doesn't need to be used to replicate the full carcinoma, but it can be dissected and isolated to replicate a whole host of individual systemic ailments. And like a harp, the strings to this morbid tune are being discriminately plucked as needed for the chord. So I believe that what I believe is very clearly here. I believe that this is a direct action. I believe that we're going to see where the new base of operations for white supremacy is going to be. I think that DeSantis, with his red meat throwing so far as the riot act in his anti-riot act in Florida, basically giving white supremacists an idea, a Kyle Rittenhouse pass on the next protests in the state of Florida, being able to have a green light to even run over protesters with their vehicles, to shoot protesters within a certain number of feet of a business, all sorts of ignorant shit that he's basically doing, trying to placate the known racists in his state. The question is whether or not they pass the torch over to him. And I think that if that's the case, if conservatism tries to use Florida as a backstop, I believe that this year's hurricane season is going to be fucking crazy. You heard it here first in February. I believe that this hurricane season is going to be fucking crazy, and that Jacksonville curve that normally happens, that curve where we're sort of insulated from any sort of hurricanes typically, because they sort of curve up and hit the Carolinas, I think that that's going to go out the wind too. I think that we're going to have a hurricane season where every single major city in Florida is hit by at least one hurricane. I think Tampa, Orlando, Miami, and Jacksonville are all going to be hit by hurricanes this year, if that's the case. And it's going to basically be another version of the playbook, right? Another version of, okay, well, they said that they were going to be they're Republicans and they want to have self-governance and blah, 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 and a limited government. But look at all the people that they need to have helped, that they need to help them in this time of crisis. That will also, in such an event like that, that will also have a negative effect on people moving to Florida from New York, remember? All right? You have a large amount of banks and financial institutions moving to Florida from New York. That would put a nice bit of windy water on that situation, or a nice bit of rain on that parade, if that were to occur as well. So I believe that the knives are out, the long knives are out, right? I think we're seeing what happens when a system of racism and white supremacy has a large, huge technological advantage over a population based on its huge several billion into the trillions of dollar military spending that it has every single year, right? So what is white supremacy, right? It's kind of hard for you to see what white supremacy is from a black perspective. So that's why I went down this, right? So when we see what is white supremacy, from our perspective, we normally think back to an overseer. It's almost like an archetypical genetic memory of having somebody watch over us as we work, right? You could also say that's the reason why black people have a deference or dislike or distaste of that, particularly on our jobs or in private life. We really don't like people watching over us like that. You know what I'm saying? We'd rather not have that happen. But anyways, we may see ourselves as through the eyes of an overseer, right? So we see ourselves as workers, and we see somebody as looking over us. Like as we got freer, or as we started to run away, the archetype changed a little bit, right? So we see ourselves as slaves, right? Then we started seeing ourselves as freemen, but the former property of a plantation owner, right? So we no longer tried to see ourselves through the eyes of a overseer overseeing our work. We started seeing ourselves as former property of an owner, right? Now that owner, probably majority of their work was overseen by an overseer, and that overseer is mainly responsible for making sure our work was performed. But we started seeing ourselves from that sort of larger perspective of a plantation owner and the former property of a plantation owner, and therefore the seat of the ideology of racism and white supremacy came in the sort of embodiment of a plantation owner, somebody who desires our work, somebody who desires us as property, right? The institutional desire to own us as property, and then you expand out to the government supporting that institution that this person was allowed to own us, right? And you see how this archetype still, even without me saying anything, all right? This is obviously in like the 50s or 60s, all right? Maybe even the 40s, but maybe the 40s. But if I told you to point out who is the slaves and who is the overseer, who is the plantation owner in this photo, it would be kind of obvious, right? Who's taking advantage of whose labor potentially in this photo, all right? It's pretty obvious, all right? Who's doing what? But it's not obvious because you don't know who these people are and you don't know what's going on. But archetypically, you associate this white guy with being somebody who is either manipulating these black people or using the wealth of these black people or using the labor of these descendants of American slaves in the background, right? And that's how you sort of frame the situation, right? You frame it from a standpoint of labor being transferred to this individual, right? And then it sort of transitioned over to policing, right? From slave catchers and stuff like that being transitioned into police officers, and then them being the face of the dog sickers in the civil rights movement, right? You sort of transition that your thought pattern to see yourself through the eyes of, or through the framing of police, right? So in that frame, they see you as a criminal, right? You don't know, the power structure doesn't now see you as property and doesn't see you as the labor from your property. I mean, the wealth from your labor as transferred back to the owner of you as a right of a property ownership. You start seeing it as through the eyes of the police officer who's beating you or arresting you, and you think to yourself, well, they think of us as criminals. They're breeding us to be criminals, right? And so when you see an image like this, it does have a link to this, but it's transformed, right? It's transitioned, right? Like all of these officers are white, with the exception of, I can't really tell this guy so far as race, but they all, to a certain degree, have been granted privileges and permission slips from white supremacy to do their acts. The problem with that is that they also do the same shit to white people, right? Now, this is a white person going, I think this is a white person. Can't really tell, that hand is kind of, that's telling me he's white, but I think he's white. But you see what I'm saying. I could pull up a protest for Occupy Wall Street and you can see the same thing. The problem is this sort of police violence, all right, indiscriminate police violence can also be equally applied to white people, which gives them cover to say that this is a class issue. This isn't a race-based issue. It's a class issue, right? But the problem is the Flint crisis happened. And like I said, Flint is a very good case study. You don't actually have to study Flint in order to recreate a Flint. But by having Flint occur, you have a wealth of information, right? You have a wealth of knowledge about the populace, what they can take, what they can endure, what sort of protests will spring up from this type of infrastructure collapse, what sort of games the media can play in order to forestall any sort of indictments, what sort of indictments are politically acceptable at certain times, how do those indictments actually occur, what sort of support do you have to give to the community ongoing, how much does that cost, what are the political gains in not doing it versus doing it. All sorts of things can be learned from Flint, right? And the thing is, again, white people were part of the experiment too, but the majority of the people in Flint, is my understanding, were black. And then you have this individual, this dumbass piece of shit individual, mocking those individuals, which is funny how this is clearly a propaganda stunt, right? I do not believe that water that's in that glass is from Flint in any way, shape, fashion, or form, specifically as this person delineates what real water from Flint actually looks like. But post-indictment, post-criminal indictment for the city managers in Flint, you can now clearly see that this is propaganda that you're seeing before you. This is propaganda, but there's no problem with him doing that. But then you start seeing, like, what are we? What are we? The question still remains, what are we to white supremacy? And my inclination is this. When you see this, what do you see? You see a man with a black eye. He's wearing orange. He may already be in jail, right? Or this may be his clothes, but you can't really tell whether or not this is his clothes or whether or not this is jail paraphernalia, all right? But he's already obviously been beat up. So if this is jail clothes, then maybe he was beat up by the officers. You know what white supremacists see is my thesis? White supremacists see this. They saw this back here. They saw that right 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 here. This is what we are to white supremacy. We are experimental chimps. And so it's one thing for you to think of yourself as a former slave trying to gain freedom, right? Or a former slave trying to escape the bondage of slavery and the systemic tentacles of slavery. It's a different notion and a different game to be played, or a different framing to be had when you see yourself in the same way they see you. They don't see you as property. They probably never saw you as property, really. They don't see you as your labor. They probably use you as labor. I mean, if we could have these chimps go out in the field and plow the field and get some work out of them, fine. Sort of a low way of using them, but hey, doesn't really matter. We can talk to these chimps and put them in the field, and they can go out and pick cotton for us. Awesome. But in this moment, in this time, in this day, what we are to these individuals are experimental chimps. What we are is we are people that they could put into very specific situations, with society having literally no fucks to give about us in any way, shape, fashion, or form. Proof positive. Flint is proof positive of that. But they could put us in all sorts of horrible situations to gain data sets, to gain data points from our suffering, and use it for other things. Like destabilizing Texas and turning it into a blue state, for instance. Or reversing the trend of migration to Florida and Texas. This is what we are to them. It's not about money, right? So, yes, we need reparations. I'm not backing down from that. We need reparations, right? But I think we need to have proper framing of why we're not going to get reparations. I think we need to have proper framing as to what our usefulness is to these individuals, these sick individuals. And our usefulness is as experimental chimps. And if you get a large amount of money out of having experimental chimps in your surrounding and using their situation to better your research, then you're not just going to give that away so easily and allow that chimp to escape with all of the potential data that you can provide from them. And I think that we need to calculate that or add that to our calculus as to what we're going to have to do in our freedom struggle, right? The value that you have to your enemy or to your captor denotes the severity and harshness with which you're going to have to fight to gain your freedom, right? If I'm kidnapping you because I potentially think that you're going to give me, that I'm going to get $5,000 out of it, is different than if I'm kidnapping you and I think I'm going to get $50 million out of it, right? Like if I have you captive and I know that your father can provide me $50 million for your return, I'm going to hold you a little bit differently. I'm going to hold you in a different house. I'm going to do certain things, certain movements. I'm going to be a little bit more serious about who I involve in the plan and into the conspiracy versus if I'm kidnapping somebody just for $5,000, right? That's going to denote both the longevity that I'm going to fight, as well as the harshness with which I'm going to fight, as well as the cost-benefit analysis of me potentially going to jail for my crimes, right? They don't just extract wealth from us. They extract knowledge of human behavior from us. Knowledge of human behavior that they can use in their larger, more antiquated system of kingship control, right? And I think that what's going on is that they're knocking down white supremacy to a certain degree. In its current form, they're knocking down white supremacy. And the reason why I say this, the reason why I see reparations as sort of like it's almost like a chimp in the hospital saying, "Hey, we should have health care." It's like the experimenter thinking to himself, "Wait a minute, they don't really get what they are, but they're asking for something kind of dangerous to our whole idea of using this chimp's body for experimentation, right? Of purposefully injecting or creating carcinoma in its body for the purpose of drug experimentation." They're on the road of understanding what they truly are, right? And eventually they're going to want to be let out of the hospital entirely. Right now they're asking for health insurance, which doesn't make sense. Like, we're asking for reparations, which doesn't fully make sense. I'm going to say this and I'm going to back off. Because at the end of the day, what we're asking for is Federal Reserve notes. I think personally what we should be asking for is greenbacks. I think that what we should be asking for is debt-free dollars, right? I think that we need to go beyond reparations and go more specific into our requests for reparations, such that we don't get sucked and played into a larger monetary policy, right? I think that we should be given greenbacks, not treasury notes, not Federal Reserve notes, right? That's what I think that we should be given as a part of our reparations. I want to add this in here too. It's not just that we need greenbacks. I guess this is going to be a mini version of a longer video, but we need territory as well. 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 But we don't need territory on the same level as Native Americans with their patchwork of land, across states. We need actual autonomous territory so that we escape the hospital, is what I'm saying, right? If we were to be just given money, but we're still stuck in the hospital, right? That's a problem, right? What black people lack is we lack a nation state that actually is homogenous to our culture, heterogeneous to our culture. Not heterogeneous. Heterogeneous? I have to look that up. I don't want to use words incorrectly. But homogenous to our culture, right? So basically, Chinese people have China. Nigerian people have Nigeria, a nation state of Nigerians with a patchwork of tribal ancestry, but generally a joint ancestry that can be summed up in the nation state of Nigeria, right? Mexicans have Mexico with the same sort of homogenous governance, right? Even though it's still set up in a system of white supremacy, from a standpoint of Mexicans outside of Mexico, they have a homogenous government that looks like them, or at least cares about their lineage, or counts their lineage as a part of their history, such that they actually act on their behalf. What we need is a framework akin to Native Americans. We need autonomous government, autonomous self-rule, right? Not like the Caribbean, not like the U.S. Virgin Islands, where the U.S. Virgin Islands can barely keep a criminal out of the governorship every 4 years, I believe they have elections down there, right? That's a very good example of how black people, how descendants of American slaves should not run a government. They can't even keep the damn lights on or keep fresh water coming on or being pumped to people in the Virgin Islands, because they're too busy sipping water that flowed off of their metal roofs with feces and high metal content in it, bragging about not needing a filter. That's the motherfuckers in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We don't need to use them as an example of our own self-governance, though, right? But we do need self-governance for black people, such that we're outside of the hospital, is what I'm talking about. And you know exactly where the fuck I'm going with it as you look at this map, right? These are the states with the highest population of black people, right?
Number one, number two, possibly number three, needs to either be wholly through eminent domain taken for black people. My suggestion is one of those four, because of their water access, specifically their water access, right? There needs to be a territory of black people. If we're, which I need to go into a separate video for this, but if there's going to be reparations, there needs to be a set of reparations if you don't want to move to one of these states that's specifically designated for black people. That land and territory is taken from a collection of federal lands in these states, state lands in these states, and then eminent domain to make sure that land is contiguous, right? Or contiguous, all right? But if you don't want to go there, you get one check. If you do want to go there, you get a separate larger check. You get a different larger check, right? If you're a HBCU and you're not willing to relocate to there, okay, you get one set of federal assistance. If you're an HBCU and you do want to move your operations to there, then you get another set of federal assistance, right? I think that what we really need to build, and people want to say that it's segregationist all over again. I don't believe that that's segregationist. We need you don't live in a hospital. You have a house outside of a hospital, and you go to the hospital if you need help, right? We should no longer live in the plantation that is the United States of America. We should have a separate nation, an autonomously ruled nation with treaties or whatever between us and the federal government that allows us a very a limited form, but an obvious form of self-governance, with the attraction being that those individuals who come to that state to participate in that experiment, right, get a certain level of benefit out of reparations, right? Not just simply that you get a check cut and then all of a sudden you take the money and you spend it on white shit and then it just goes back into white hands. But you and your generation, you get a better standard of living. Maybe your child does, but then all of a sudden the system of white supremacy can take over again, having that money infused into the economy, now creating hyper billionaires and on the road of trillionaires, because that new money is now circulating in their economy. You see how that works? All right, so we need out of the hospital. We're experimental chimps. We need out of the hospital, because all that's going to happen is, okay, well, how can we use these chimps? These are experimental chimps. We've now changed their conditions. How does this new changed condition set up for a new test framework, right? So now we're not experimenting on poor people. We're experimenting on people with wealth. How does that work? How can we use this data set? Yeah, we're going to return them back to poverty in 2 or 3 generations, but how can we use them still, you know what I'm saying, for training dummies? Can police still shoot up a person post-reparations? Can we raid their houses post-reparations? Can we indict them on a whole bunch of bullshit crimes and get away with it? Can we systemically still go after them in banking and fraudulent means? And how does that work? How would they collectively band together? Or could they, after generations of oppression, can they even have the ability to band together, right? So, yeah, this is what I'm getting at. We need to be out of the hospital. We need to be out of the research lab entirely. One of these states, if not a couple of them, if not, what is that, Mississippi and Louisiana, those states need to be for black people. Those states need to be for black people. We have a framework that is now multi-decades old called eminent domain. If a part of our reparations has to go to paying white people to get off their property, so that those houses and land can be provided to black people in an autonomous state, then so be it, right? We don't need to be in a landlocked situation like the Navajo Nation, right? We need to have water access. Is the reason why I'm pointing to number 1 or number 2. We need to have water access. We need to have water and shipping rights. So that way, if we want to trade with the Congo, all right, a large amount of post-reparations work is probably going to be utilizing the natural resources of Africa and building relationships with Africa, strong ties with Africa. And in so doing, what we need to have shipping. I know that's way long term, like a moonshot, like terraforming Mars in the minds of descendants of American slaves. But yes, we need to have trading with Africa. We need to have in these territories that we own manufacturing capacities that allow for those raw materials to be transformed into actual finished products and finished goods. And then, I don't know, shocker, trade those resources with the rest of America, which also comes into putting a talon around our cultural arts, like rap music and urban culture and stuff like that. Ferreting out Caribbean people within that art form, ferreting out agents within that art form, ferreting out anybody who is in that art form who is not a descendant of American slaves, even up to and including if we have to create another culture to replace hip-hop culture, then we go ahead and do so, right? But yeah, we need land. We need land. I know. We need land, though. It's not just money. We need land and self-governance, because as long as we stay in the hospital, we're going to be experimental chimps. So I wanted to make that clear with this. I wanted to have a separate video about that, but let's make my thought clear on this matter.
But you don't really realize that type of shit until you understand how your enemy sees you, right? So if I'm a captive, right, and I know that this captor is gonna get $5,000 from me, from my kidnapping, and I got $10,000 in the bank, well, clearly I'm gonna be like, hey, you know what I'm saying? If you let me go, I'll just give you the $5,000. Like, if you're doing all this for $5,000, I'll just give you the $5,000. Period. And you know what? I'll give you the $5,000, and then I got another $5,000. I'll give you the other $5,000 in like 2 to 3 months. Right? You can come to my house. You already have my address. You can come to my house. I'll give you the other $5,000 in the next 2 to 3 months, and you can take that money and be gone. So you'll have $10,000. Right? Because I'd rather just move on from this situation. I'd rather not be kidnapped. But if the person is asking for $50 million from you, you don't think to yourself, well, hey, I want a cut of that $50 million. You start to think to yourself, this motherfucker will kill me. This motherfucker is going to kill me if he don't get this money. Because if he's asking for $50 million, then at least $25 million could be used to search for this motherfucker if something happens to me. So this motherfucker has a plan to kill me if shit goes south with this plan of kidnapping me. They have a plan to kill me, guarantee. They're asking for $50 million. They have a plan to kill me if shit does not go right. And they may already have a plan to kill me regardless in this situation, just if I've already seen their face or whatever, right? That's going to change your dynamic of how you see your way out of the situation. Is this just simply a money issue, or is there other things involved? And I think that, again, we know that without a system of white supremacy in this country, it falls apart. But I think we're missing the why. This is the why. The reason why it falls apart is that the power structure doesn't have, the more antiquated power structure doesn't have a test dummy, an experimental chimp, a social experimental chip, right? It doesn't have that anymore. It can't predict human behavior accurately enough in order to control its larger populace, right? As well, not just domestically, but globally as well. These games are also played in other countries as well, right? So their experimental chimps no longer are in the hospitals. That's probably going to lead to the fall, because at that point you don't have a class of people who are who are discriminated against anymore after a generation or two, what are we going to be doing? Well, after a generation or two of reparations, what are we going to be doing? Well, the next fight is probably going to be a class fight. It's going to be a, hey, we need to reduce the size of the federal government. We need to increase the strength and formidability of local governance and the lives of people. This if we don't also ask for land and territory for ourselves, which I think we should ask for. I think we should ask for land and territory for ourselves. I think that in this country, I think that what we need to do is we need to say that you get one reparations check if you want to stay outside of this land and territory. You get another reparations check if you're willing to move to this land and territory, wherever it is, right? And therefore, I think that reparations check for moving to that land and territory should be a lot higher. But it's either A, we have a territory of our own to sort of focus on, or B, we're never going to get reparations, because they're going to realize that right after we're done with our reparations check, we're going to be conservative in our viewpoints. And that conservatism is going to lead to a reduction of the power base in the federal government. So we either realize who we are to the power structure and actually make a valid ask of what we want and what we need, which is the reason why, mind you, why Native Americans, in my opinion, were able to get their own land and territory, because they realized that providing them their own land and territory would reduce any attempts at further individual rebellions over land and territory in the future. But I think that we need to ask for our own land and territory in the United States, whether it be a full state or whether it be a land and territory much like the Navajo Nation that spans multiple states. And I think that, again, those individuals in those lands and states, in that land and territory, should have a different reparations check than those individuals who are outside of it. Because at the end of the day, I think that we need to have self-governance, because they are not going to replace their chimp class with another set of individuals. They're not going to all of a sudden go to Afro-Caribbeans and use those individuals. And even if they did, what will happen is those individuals would just go back home or go to another country. The only captive native people that don't have another home to go back to, because what you don't realize is some white people can go back to their home country. If they can prove ancestry in Germany, they can go back to Germany. If they can prove ancestry in the UK, they can go back to the UK and become citizens. If they can prove ancestry in France, they can go back. They don't talk about that. They don't bring that up, but they can. All right? They could easily get citizenship in Europe, whereas you can't. If they could prove ancestry in Europe, they can go back to Europe. All right? The only captive populace that can't go anywhere are Native Americans, who are racist pieces of shit just as much as white people are, because they own slaves too, trying to be civilized, quote unquote, and descendants of American slaves. And the bullshit Tariq Nasheed bullshit, oh, we were here for thousands of years. Tariq Nasheed is a fucking agent, which is the reason why he shouldn't have aligned himself with American descendants of slavery. But American descendants of slavery are pieces of shit themselves, right? They have no idea. Let me pause for a second. So Yvette came out with some video exposing Dr. William Darity, which is fine. You're able to expose him, but it's like it shows her in a complete inept ability to manage relationships properly, right? Because she held this information entirely to her chest until the last minute, when she felt slighted for not being a part of some sort of HR 40 commission or some shit like that. All right? So wait a minute. You were told not to fuck with Tariq Nasheed, and you fuck with him anyway because you guys said that he was basically loyal and did what you guys told him to do, in the form of he tweeted exactly what you guys told him to tweet. Right?
and you held down, but yet still when you guys had an issue, instead of handling it privately, which is an issue that's not really an issue because Tone is currently sucking a bubble out of Ice Cube's ass for access, right? Even though Ice Cube said the exact same thing that Tariq Nasheed said, so far as that is concerned, I might as well handle that too. I might as well handle the Roland Martin shit too. No, I'll wait till another video because I gotta queue it up and I don't feel like deleting shit off of this. But I'll reference that as well. But basically, you should have handled that in behind the scenes. You should have handled the situation with Tariq Nasheed behind the scenes. Y'all should have had a sit-down conversation, and you should have been like, hey, you know what I'm saying, what's going on with this? You should have included him in the conference when his platforms were the major means of advertising for the ADOS conference in Kentucky. And I'm so glad I was so close to going, but I'm so glad I didn't, because it was close to my birthday too. So I was so glad I was so close to going, but I was like, you know what, nah, I'm not fucking with these people. And sure enough, and the major reason why I didn't go is the red flag for me was that you were talking about reparations for American descendants of slavery in a church. That's like having a conversation about the injustice of prisons while sitting in a jail cell, right? Christianity was a major means of holding people captive mentally, right? It was a pacification means of slaves, right? So the whole idea that you're having a conference about American descendants of slavery and their reparations claims in a church is laughable. It's actually cryable too, but it's laughable first of all. So I didn't go. But you should have included him in the conversation. You should have included him in everything. Y'all should have included, and if he had differing points of views, you guys should have handled that situation behind closed doors. Should have never have had a chair throwing incident in any way, shape, fashion, or form. Right? Her major thing is that she felt as though Sandy Darity had a departure from her in September of 2019. That's oddly pretty close, if not actually exactly when the first chair throwing incident actually occurred between Yvette Carnell, Tone, and Tariq Nasheed. Right? So that's back when it actually happened. So of course, the net effect of that situation was him not wanting to fuck with y'all because y'all are acting ghetto as shit, right? And making him look bad, right? So, but you put him on full blast late as fuck though. Late as fuck. It may have been justified, but you put him on blast late as fuck because you were hoping, because at the time you didn't have a viewership, you had already had the falling out with Tariq Nasheed, you'd never really had Sandy Darity on your shows like that anymore. But you wanted to keep the specter of his ghost and the specter of his legitimacy, as you guys kept on using charts and referencing his work in other areas. You wanted to have the specter of his legitimacy blessing your activism until you felt as though you had to bring him up and call him out. But in the process of your silence, you were actually aiding and abetting his what is it? Not CARICOM. I forgot the name of the organization. Not CARICOM. It's the one that's in Cobra. You already knew about his association and affiliation within Cobra in the beginning, but you didn't actually do anything about it. You didn't actually bring it up, right? He was referencing people of color and multiculturalistic language in his what people get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap, but you didn't actually handle it beforehand. You didn't actually handle that situation beforehand, right? In the construction of the document. Tone likes to say that his name is on the paper and he has something to do with it. Well, how come he didn't have anything to do with taking that out? All right, so when it comes down to certain people, they don't know how to, it's basically they don't know how to handle leadership, right? But these individuals talking all this shit, you have to realize all they're doing is trying to do a YouTube platform. I'm not trying to do that. That's not how I make money in any way, shape, fashion, or form. I'm more of a theorist in this space than anything. And what I'm seeing is that they see us as chimps. And the price tag of what we provide them in return
is way greater than our labor in slavery. All right, which is why I think that, again, that $15 trillion is a very small number. It needs to come with land and self-governance as well. A large portion of land and autonomous governance as well. Like, it needs to be a port access as well. It needs to have, it needs not to be landlocked. It needs to have a port access as well, which means that you're talking about giving up a large populated area through eminent domain, right? You're not talking about something simple. You're talking about something concrete. Like, if that autonomous government wants to be able to literally put people on ships and bulk ship them back to Africa, or ship them to Africa for an assistance program, or have trade with the country in Africa, right? If they want to have autonomous trade with the country in Africa, they should have the ability to do so, right? So we're not just talking about land; we're talking about water access land, right? Usually, white people own the waterfront property in the U.S. But we need to see ourselves as they see us. And what they see us for is they see us as test chimps who could potentially ruin the hospital. Now, they're going to have to put somebody in that test chimp position. But if we don't separate ourselves from the hospital entirely, if we just decide, hey, we don't want to be on the ER wing of the hospital, we want to be in general admissions, okay. They're still going to be running experiments on us, though. We want some hospital ice cream, one of those wooden sticks to eat it with, and we want to be placed in general admissions. Okay, well, we're still going to be running experiments on you, but if you want to go ahead and go to a more comfortable bed while we do so, fine. But it's very funny that, not really funny, but it's funny that they are exposing white supremacy for what they always knew it to be, a feral form of Darwinism. Like, a feral form of Darwinism is truly what white supremacy is. It's maybe propped up and cleaned up with the legitimacy of theology, like Christianity or Judaism or Mormonism. But what white supremacy truly is at its core is just feral Darwinism. The whole idea of you died because you were weak. I killed you not because I'm wrong, but because you're weak, right? I was able to kill you because you're weak. Not because I'm wrong, not because I'm evil, not because of this, that, and the third. And I think that that's what this video or this comment actually means. I think that's what it's actually saying here. It's exposing what white supremacy truly is. And that's all I have to say.